Good morning, gentlemen. I hope you've all read the bios from our guest speaker, who is David Pressler. I've known David Pressler for over 20 years. I know him as a judge because he judges photography and art all over Fairfield County, and maybe I should say Connecticut. He's known as a very good judge because of his sharp eye and his very keen wit. And I think you'll see some of that today in that respect. His wife and he travel all over the world, and we're very lucky at Lifetime Learners that we have him as a member as well as a presenter. He does regular programs like you're going to see today, which really features a lot of photography and his sharp eye. And in that respect, I have to admit, he has always got his camera ready. And don't be surprised if he didn't pull it out and take a picture of this austere group here. Today's presentation, as you know, is about Australia. I hope you all know that. It's about Australia. It just so happens, as a warming comment, I thought this is the beginning of summer down there. So if you get motivated from this presentation, this is a good time to go down there. David Pressler, please give him a warm welcome, my friend David Pressler.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I had the pleasure of attending your guest speaker last week. Gave me an introduction to your wonderful facility here and the wonderful dynamicism that this group has. I'd like to thank several people before I begin. First of all, Andre Gilbert for inviting me to participate here, and to John Walcott, Tom Lom, and to Mark Mirror, who has helped me a little bit with the technology setup. And I want to thank all of you for inviting me to be a guest speaker here. This is entitled, as you can see, Australia All Over Down Under. And just to give you a little orientation, Australia is on the other side of the world and beneath the equator, hence the term down under. The size of the continent of Australia is pretty much the size of the United States, almost 3,000 miles across. And you'll notice in the lower right, beneath Florida, that little red island state is Tasmania. And I'll be making some references to that as we go through this presentation. So this is going to be a visual experience. This is not a travelogue, and it's not a history lesson. As a designer, artist, and photographer, now retired, I have always been visually aware of the world around me, and I like to document what I see when I find it interesting from a visual point of view as well as the subject matter. So what you'll see here is the photography that represents what my eyes have seen, and I have put this presentation into 6 categories: land and water, wildlife, botanicals, Aboriginal art, architecture, and yes, some humor, visual humor. So join me for what I hope will be an eye-opening experience. Australia is a huge space with different climates. Let's see if I keep my little pointer. Flying in from Los Angeles is about a 14 to 16 hour flight, and you usually land in the eastern area of the continent. Sydney is the capital down here. Can you see that red pointer okay? Okay. And each of these red squares all over the continent are the areas that are represented with the images that I will share with you. Again, this is not a travelogue, so I'm not going to be saying, oh, that photograph represents Brisbane. Rather, just to let you know where on the continent these things that I share with you have been discovered. This is known as the dingo fence. Dingoes are wild dogs, and this fence was built in the 1800s. It was finished in 1885 as a pest exclusion fence to keep the dingoes away from the sheep and the crops. It is 3,488 miles long. And as you can see, there's really no bathroom stops on the way. From the air, the land is typically flat and vacuous. And what you see here is flying toward what has been traditionally known as Ayers Rock, very famous destination for visitors to Australia. It has now been turned over to the Aboriginal population because of its historic and religious significance to these people, and I'll talk more about them a little later. But it is now known as Uluru. And it is very interesting to walk around because underneath this rock, in different areas, are caves with petroglyphs dating back 20, 30,000 years. You can no longer climb this rock, I understand, but in 1986, on my first visit, I did. And on the horizon, those mountains are called the Olga Mountains. The unique thing about this rock is it exfoliates because of the high temperatures during the day and the cold temperatures at night. A lot of the flaking creates a very dangerous situation if you're climbing it, because I've been told 3 to 4 people die every year from falling due to the exfoliation of the rock itself. At night, toward sunset, it glows red. It's very dramatic, and it has to do with the mineral composition and the minerals in soil are seen in other areas. This is Kununurra at sunset. Kununurra is on the north coast in the tropics. And you'll see these trees are unusual in shape. They're called boab trees, and they grow in the tropics. This is in the Western Australia area, the northwestern area, called the Pilbara region. And this is Hammersley Gorge, about 2,000 feet down from the surface of the outback. And what you're seeing is the history, a record, if you will, of plate tectonics. That tree, by the way, is as big as our oak trees. Now, the southern coast, which is a popular destination, have sea stacks, very much like our Oregon coast on the Pacific. It is a magnificent site, and it used to be known as the 12 Apostles. But due to erosion, the sea has worn away most of them. So as of 2008, there were only 7 left. Very dramatic, very exciting from a visual point of view. And here you can see how the ocean, the Southern Ocean, between Antarctica and Australia has worn away the coast. Now, a very different landform, a lava plug, on the northwest coast of Tasmania, that's the island state southeast of the continent itself. Here at the fishing village called Stanley. And I've climbed that, and what you have at the top is a kind of a field with all kinds of interesting flowers and holes. And I asked a ranger, what are those holes? And he said, those are plover holes. Plovers are birds that fly down to Australia from North America, lay their eggs, and then fly back. On the west coast of Tasmania is Cradle Mountain and Dove Lake. And I was there in 2008 in what would be their fall season. And hiking around this lake, within 10 minutes, I had rain, sleet, and snow. It was a really cool experience. Off the south coast of Tasmania, in the Tasman Sea, are rock formations and bird life that are very different from what we have here in Connecticut. And the cliffs on an island called Bruny Island have these holes that are created by the surf. These cliffs are about 500 feet high, and not far away is an area known as the Tessellated Highway. This is not man-made. It's absolutely amazing that nature can create these pans filled with water. The acidic sea has worn away the limestone and created these forms over hundreds of years. Other geological formations that I found fascinating were land bridges and lava tubes. To give you an idea of scale, here are two people, hikers, and you can walk into these tubes, although I've never seen anyone come out. Behind the capital of Tasmania, which is Hobart, is a mountain called Mount Wellington. And the top are these geological formations that are quite different from other areas that I've seen. And in the northeast part of the continent, in an area known as Litchfield National Park, are these waterfalls. These are called Florence Falls. I don't know who Florence was, but she was obviously well known enough to name waterfalls after her. And you'll notice some swimmers there taking a break. It was 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Here they are taking a break, and it was just a magnificent environment where everyone went. Fabulous waterfalls to cool off. I took a Cessna 4-seater airplane with my wife, Judy, and we flew to an area that is quite remote in the northwest part of Western Australia. This would be equivalent to going to our state of Washington. And we flew over Mitchell Plateau. Now I wanted to see and hike through this area because it was dramatic and not many people go there. It took one day with a park ranger to just travel alone up this tremendously exciting rock formation. And wherever I went, I could look down and see the various falls. Then taking that plane flying up over the north coast of the continent to the Timor Sea, the geology is very different. During World War II, when the Americans came to save the Australians from the Japanese attack, and you may remember from history, the Japanese bombed the northern city of Darwin, and it had to be evacuated. The American Air Force came in, and a lot of these flat areas had Air Force claims. But I found the landforms fascinating. From this little Cessna aircraft, I could look straight down. Coves, and the color of the water caught my eye, as well as these cliffs. And the landforms, this is sand on a beach on the Timor Sea, looking straight down. And as the sea retreats, it leaves salt and these dendrite formations. The green that you see here are trees, so I'm quite high up. But I was fascinated by these forms that were left when the sea retreated. And then I flew into another area in the Pilbara region in central northwestern Australia. Anybody know what these are called? I wouldn't think you would. These are called the Bungle Bungles. These are mountain forms that were only discovered in the late 1970s. And you cannot get there unless you fly. Looking down from the plane, you can see into the gorges, but on the ground, these striations are caused literally by a sedimentary rock, as well as a type of algae that turns black. It's like you're in another world. And oh, by the way, it was much cooler here. It was only 110 degrees. Now what you'll see here, that is a termite mound. And I'll talk more about termite mounds in a little while. These formations are known as the elephants. It's a good trunk shot, isn't it? I flew out at sunset, just at dusk. And as we flew out, we flew across the Kimberley region in the northwestern area of Australia, which is vacuous and was only used by cattle ranchers. And then I looked down and I saw this. What is that? And the pilot told me, that's the world's largest diamond mine. It's known as the Argyle Diamond Mine, and it is just about mined out. They will discontinue mining there shortly. But you can see where the trucks would go along these roadways. And this is Lake Argyle. This is the largest man-made lake in the world and was created in the 70s to provide water for Western Australia, which is pretty much desert. At sunset, dusk, I felt I was on another planet. And here is a different area. This is the Indian Ocean, off the west coast of Australia, about a 3-hour drive north of Perth, which is the main city on the west coast. On the upper left, you see some blue. That is the Indian Ocean. The white area is the sand, and what you see in the foreground are ancient sand areas, about 40 square miles, known in the Aboriginal tongue as the Nambung. Most people call it the Pinnacles, and the reason is the rock formations that you can wander around are quite unique and very surprising. But the sand, I discovered, absorbs sound. So if you're with anybody and they are out of sight behind one of these pediments, they can't hear you. You can scream all you like. It's dead silent. Some remind me of human forms, maybe a couple of figures in robes, maybe with a little child. Here's looking at you, kid. Maybe a kangaroo. There's no names associated with any of these. This is a federal or national park. There are no park rangers around. You're on your own. Jabba the Hutt, Star Wars. And this was a big surprise to me, because my first visit to this area was in 1986, and I saw this pediment, this form, this pinnacle, in 1986, and I photographed it. And I was looking for it. For the 2.5 hours I was walking around the pinnacles, and on my way out, I spotted it. And it hadn't changed at all. So this is what it looks like today. No different than it did in 1986. In a very different area of the continent, this is the island called Kangaroo Island off the south coast of Australia's continent in the Southern Ocean. And it is composed of several national parks, all of which offer different experiences. This is Flinders Chase National Park, that in 2008 I wanted to visit, but the park was closed due to lightning storms that created mass fires, just like we got out there in California now. It has regrown. I took this trip that this photograph was taken last year, 2016. So here I'm driving across Flinders Chase National Park, and there are some interesting rock formations, which they call the Remarkable Rocks. And you can hike around, and it's right on the ocean. Get an idea of scale here. There's a woman hiker sitting underneath this area. And I thought they were quite sculptural, and I'd never seen any forms quite like this in rocks. But in the winter, after the plowing had been done here in Connecticut, and the snow that had been piled up at the side of the road started to melt, I found many forms very much like this in the ice, the snow. Is that an eagle? Here's his leg. And ready to gobble up anything that gets in its way. And then I spotted this rock. It was quite large. And I went over it, and it was hollow. So I said to my wife, Judy, let's get in. And I had somebody take a shot of us. So now, this is entitled The Hatchlings. The Aussies are very meticulous about the way they handle their national parks. And their walkways allow you to go to areas that would be very difficult to get to without walkways like this. And this rainbow I photographed in 1986 on the east coast of Australia in Botany Bay. So now we'll visit some wildlife. Of course, you recognize this as the koala. But do you know what these are? No, it's not a cemetery. These are magnetic termite mounds. These termites are of a particular type that build these termites over many years that are oriented north and south. all of them. And this is a cathedral termite now. And these are the little fellas that make these. These are found all through the tropics in the northern part of the continent. Not always this large. As you can see, it's cathedral style. But there are other termites that live in trees and make nests. And green ants that create nests. And when they finish the nests and leave, they leave these baskets hanging in the trees. This is a relative to our black widow spider. It's called the red crescent, and it lives in holes and mines. I was going through opal mines in south central Australia in an area called Coober Pedy, which in the Aboriginal language means white man in a hole, digging for, yes, opals. So I turned to my right after my native guide said, "Be careful, don't get too close to the side of the tunnel." And I saw spider webs. And I took out my point and shoot camera and I just luckily got a shot of one. So you might say I put the bite on him. We have lots of birds, many types, and their crows are a little bigger than ours here in New England, and they have the screechiest voices that are, they would deafen our crows. And lots of pelicans. And these pelicans have huge beaks. And I felt like I was being scrutinized. And herons and magpies. And the sulfur-crested cockatoos that fly in at night, just at dusk. And these parrots are called galahs. And we were told that if a person in a social situation has a loud, screechy voice, they're called galahs, because these birds have really loud, screechy calls. In the north, in the tropics, I just was lucky enough to spot this very brightly colored parrot. And Australia has black swans, not white swans. They're black. And this is a Pacific gull in the Tasman Sea off the coast of Tasmania. And storks. And these are called Cape Barren geese. And they seem to fly in everywhere. They don't seem to be afraid of anybody. And surprisingly, on the west coast, on the side of the road, I found peacocks. And I was told that sometimes they escape from captivity and they survive very well in the outback. Here's looking at you, kid. That is an emu in the temperate rainforest of Tasmania. And I didn't know it until this last year. They also live on the west coast in the desert areas. And here I was lucky enough to use a telephoto lens to get a shot of this one with its chicks. It was a good quarter-mile away. And I was lucky not to get too close because they're very protective of their offspring. This is a skink. And I saw a number of these in the Nambong, or the Pinnacle region. as well as lizards, very well camouflaged. And up north, saltwater crocodiles. These are very dangerous. They can jump 15 feet out of the water. We were warned not to walk near the water bank, near the banks of any water areas, because not only are these very well camouflaged, you can barely see them, but they love to come after you. I couldn't believe it. And very different animal form. This is an Australian sea lion off the south coast of Kangaroo Island in the Southern Ocean. They have beautiful forms, and one could get, I would say 20 feet from these animals without creating any problems. Sometimes they're sleeping on the shore, on the rocks, well camouflaged. And this is a New Zealand fur seal. They live there too, even though there's thought they came from New Zealand. They sleep. When they wake up, they look around and scrutinize you also. If you're deemed safe, they say, he's not interesting, and they push off. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you know what this is, but it is not a porcupine. It's a marsupial, and it's known as an echidna. I kid you not, it is an echidna. They're very shy, and I tried to get a shot of its face, and eventually, from a distance, I was able to get one that turned so that I could see its little snout here. It is very rare to see the snout of an echidna. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you know what this is. It's a wombat. And wombats live in Australia, but they also live in the South Island of Tasmania, in the temperate climate. Trying to get his face was a challenge, but I eventually did. And in the jungles of Kangaroo Island, I was able to spot lots of koalas in the trees. Now, these animals sleep 18 hours a day. They get all their moisture from the tree leaves that they eat, and once in a while you can catch them eating. They only feed on what the Australians call gum trees, and a specific variety. I said, "Are you taking my picture? Have you signed a photo release? My agent wants to speak with you." I don't know if he's mouthing off to me or just waking up. And this is a type of wallaby, small type of kangaroo. This is called the Bennett wallaby. And they're very tame. You can't get very close to them because they're shy and they'll jump around and leave. And then on Kangaroo Island, there's the Tamar wallaby, somewhat different. Same size, and they come out at dusk. And they're suspicious. And also at dusk, there's the western gray kangaroo that forages in these fields on Kangaroo Island. These fields, I didn't know why they were yellow. What are they? Well, it's rapeseed, or as we know it, canola blossoms. And canola, I'm informed, was named after the rapeseed was developed as a source for oil in Canada. So canola, Canada oil. I learned something. I had to go all the way on the other side of the world to learn it. But these are very shy animals, very aware of what's around them. And they're large. They're about 10 feet tall. They're great basketball players. And they're looking at sheep because sheep are the main stock that graze out there. And off the south coast of the continent, I went out on a small boat and I was able to photograph dolphins in the Southern Ocean. And it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It was so cold, my camera battery kept freezing. Now I'll take you through some botanicals. These are called banksias. They grow only in Australia, and there are multiple varieties of them. And those are petals. They're soft. They look like they're scruffy and like a rug, but they're not. But when these varieties complete their blossoming, they leave a husk. And what you see here are where the seeds pop out when the husks dry. And they're very interesting. And some craftsmen have actually made small containers out of these by turning them on a lathe and hollowing them out. And there are banyan trees in the tropic areas, which amazed me when I was climbing up Mitchell Plateau, where all those wonderful waterfalls were, how they send their roots out horizontally through these rock crevices and then send up new boughs or new trunks. This is one of those boab trees that I pointed out early on. This was transplanted from the tropics in the north to Perth on the west coast as part of the collection in their Kings Park Botanical Garden. This fascinated me. Eucalyptus trees are prevalent throughout the continent, and the bark on a type of these eucalyptus trees reminded me of kind of a landscape. These are the nuts of a eucalyptus tree, and when they open up, you get blossoms of different types depending on the variety of eucalyptus. And then they're nuts. This is a bottle brush. This variety of botanical grows in Tasmania, and it's called Globhakia. Different varieties. And a tea tree blossom that I photographed at the top of Mount Wellington, Tasmania. This is a red-green kangaroo paw. Kangaroo paws also are indigenous just to Australia, and this variety only grows in the Perth, West Australia area, but there are other varieties. Now this algae grows on the shoreline of eastern Tasmania and add very interesting color if you're hiking in that area. Yellow lichen, white lichen. This is from the Cradle Mountain National Park area that I mentioned, where I had the snow and water and sleet. Climbing the mountains, you run into these, what they call mountain cranberry. I don't know if they're edible. And these reminded me very much of Solomon seal here in the United States. I could not research it out specifically. There are mosses and pandani. These vertical trees grow in the temperate zone as well as the tropics. And grass trees. Now, they very often burn down some of their forested areas to allow regeneration, and that's why you see at the base here all this charred area. But in other areas, those trees haven't grown that large, and they're quite beautiful to look at. Very interesting texture. But they also have tree ferns. They're as tall as you are. Sometimes some of them grow up to 15 feet. And when they die out, their leaves drip down and kind of look like women's tresses. I didn't know ferns turn color in the fall. Well, in the fall, in Tasmania, I discovered they do. This I photographed on the Gordon River, southwest Tasmania, which used to be a penal colony, an English penal colony in the early 1800s, where they made ships for the British. And what's interesting about that area, I discovered there's a pine tree called the Huon pine that has no source of deterioration. Insects don't eat it. It can fall into the water, it doesn't deteriorate, and they're now bringing up these logs that were somehow left in this Gordon River, and craftsmen are making bowls and all kinds of artifacts. You cannot cut down a Huon pine. They're considered an endangered species. On that river, it was so absolutely calm that it was like a mirror. In the tropics, in the northeast of Australia, in an area known as the Kakadu, an Australian name, there are wetlands, and lotus grow there. And the pods are fascinating forms, and when they open up, the seeds pop out. And those seeds are used by Asians as a medicinal. And I have actually tried it. If you take dried lotus seeds, you can make a tea out of them. They're very mild tasting. They will dry up your sinuses immediately. And it works. Here in the north coast, I found mangoes growing. And on the south coast, on the Southern Ocean, kelp. These are the size of garden hoses. And they must anchor themselves because this is one of the forms of kelp that I found next to it. They have wonderful botanical gardens, and in one of them I found an Amazonian water bladder with a blossom that only opens when it gets dark or when the clouds form over it. And here it is, an Amazonian water bladder blossom. It is about a foot in diameter. And of course, water lilies, and frangipani, and a almond tree blossom that I photographed in Perth on the west coast. I discovered on the west coast they grow a lot of straw flowers, which dry as they look here. And throughout the southwest of Australia, calla lilies grow in the wild. Now this I discovered up north in the tropics, in Litchfield National Park. And I was amazed, this blossom, which was about 2 inches high, was growing on a bough, and there were no leaves on the whole tree, but several of these blossoms. So I researched it out, and it was called a sticky korajang. So I'm sure you'll remember that when I give you your 10-minute quiz following this presentation. Bottle brush grow there, grevillea, oak leaf diandra, and on Kangaroo Island, I found these growing on the shore. And I asked the guide that I had with me, what are those? They're succulents. And she told me, I don't know the scientific term, but the locals call them pig nose. Pig nose? I'm not sure why, unless pigs like to eat them. And, of course, aloe. Now we're going to take you to a product that you don't want to step on. These are called spinifex. They grow throughout the continent in the desert areas. And I will show you how the Aborigines showed them in their artwork. These are like needles. You don't want to brush up against them. And they grow in profusion. So I never found out how the original inhabitants, who probably walked barefoot, got around this. And Norfolk Island pine, or Araucaria. We have some here in the United States. They've been transported all over the world, and they're found on Kangaroo Island. Now I'll take you for a little tour through Aboriginal art. The Aborigines came from Africa 60,000 years ago. That's 60,000. When you think the Native Americans are supposed to have come across the land bridge from Mongolia 15,000 years ago to North America, this predates it by quite a bit. Now, they came across land bridges that were much larger than they are today, and they made canoes or boats out of tree logs, tree trunks. Today there are 52 dialects of the Aboriginal languages. And this picture and the next couple were taken at the turn of the last century, in the 1920s. And this I took up north in the Kakadu National Park, which is owned by the Aboriginal people and maintained by the Aboriginal people. Let's see here. This square, or this triangle here, diamond shape, is the location of the next couple of images. This is called Kolumburu, and it was an early 20th century monastery settled by Spaniards who did something that we don't really believe was a good idea today. This is the remains of the monastery. It is now a museum. They took the children away from the native people and tried to convert them to Christianity, and forced the parents to work in the fields all day. And the only way they could see their children was when they finished the work. So this was discontinued in the 1970s. And in their museum were some ancient works. This is an early creation figure called a Wangina. And this is a creation figure that dates back, who knows, maybe 60,000 years ago. But it appears in multiple art forms, the Wangina. And what you see here in the lower portion is silhouettes, are called Bradshaw painting. And they are only found in Western Australia. Very different images that were painted by the native peoples as opposed to what you'll see in a moment. this diamond shape on the north coast is the area called Kakadu. And this is the Obiri rock site, dating back 40,000 years. And these rock paintings, or etchings, depicted their animal food sources. And they were called X-ray painting, because you can see the spine of the turtle here, the legs, inside the shell. Here you can see. And while this is a little difficult to see, these are barramundi fish. And you can see their internal organs. Other forms. Stick figures, dancing figures, all symbolic of rituals held by the Aborigines. And other animal forms. Clearly, the saltwater crocodile is seen here in white. And female figures. They also sprayed dye or pigment around their hand to leave their handprints. This is considered a new painting, 200 years old. They painted on bark, and they still do. These are dancing figures, and this is Lightning Man, a creation figure called Namakan, and it is seen many, many times through Aboriginal art. But this is particularly interesting to me because it is a contemporary painting that I photographed in a museum, and it depicts the spinifex, that spiky grass. All the little white dots in between that are on the black background are symbolic of spinifex. The large circles depict either water holes or campsites, and the medium-sized forms, these smaller yellow, red, white, those forms depict people sitting around a site. And those symbols continue. Now the way they paint, and they weave also, but they paint meticulously by taking a plant stem, dipping it into a pigment, and then dotting it on a substrate, whether it be bark or leather or canvas today. And I witnessed them painting. They take great care, and the meaning of their work is not always known to Westerners. They don't like always sharing their symbology. But they do paint things that relate to their life, their food sources, the animals in their environment. And the striations are just so perfect, and they do not use rulers. This painting depicts a journey from the lower left to the upper right around water holes. And here you see the spinifex, and they're moving from place to place. And this is a contemporary painting. This is quite large, actually. It was about 7 feet wide and about 3.5 feet high. But I found it particularly interesting, but I couldn't fit it in my suitcase. The architecture is interesting. I'll try to move through this rapidly because I know we have a time constraint. But of course, you're familiar with the Sydney Opera House, I'm sure. And that was created by John Utzon, a Scandinavian architect, Danish architect, who passed away in 2008. And this opera house opened in 1973, and it is a World Heritage Site as of 2007. But I was fascinated by the form and from different angles. And you can see the scale here, the one in the lower left. Most people don't know, but there are two colored tiles that form the roofs. A cream color and a lighter, almost white. And I never get tired of looking at this. It is a true symbol of Sydney and Australia. But there are other historic places. His Majesty's Theatre is preserved as a historic site. It was built in 1904, and it still functions as a theater. In 1986, I attended an opera performance here in Perth on the western coast with my great cousin who died some years ago at 92 years old. In Perth, this is a famous galleria, stores called London Court Arcade with King Arthur and the Dragon. Historic sites like the Melbourne Convention Hall, which inside did not have a convention when I was there, but they have conventions with different types of businesses. This is a historic hotel dating back to the early 20th century called the Windsor Hotel. Grand Hotel still in operation in Melbourne. In Perth, this is the governor's home. In Darwin, a smaller city, a little more modest governor's house. This is typical of the English homes that were built in Australia in the 1800s, and more wealthy people in a historic home here. In Adelaide, the South Australian Museum that houses Aboriginal artwork and contemporary art, and the Criterion Hotel reflects the Art Deco style of the 1930s in Perth. And the Mercury newspaper building in Hobart, Tasmania, also the Art Deco style. South Australia Museum is now doing what a lot of buildings are reflecting, contemporary architecture melded with the traditional. And in Darwin, on the north coast, this is the Parliament building, and they're experimenting with laser-cut metals to create fences, and they're doing sculptures throughout the city in Melbourne, public sculptures. Their architecture is quite unique. This is the Perth Arena, sports arena, and this is their library. Also, the city square with contemporary architecture. The information site where you can get information on the area. They're experimenting with new forms, but they're also lighting up with traditional forms at night. This is in Adelaide on the south coast. And as I walked through the streets, I saw this building that changed color every 2 minutes. Same building, different site. This is the highest building in South Australia, called the Eureka Skydeck 88. Has 55 stories and a observation deck at the very top. The Chinese are building here in Melbourne, not just simple buildings, but interesting sculptural forms. And Federation Square is their art center in Melbourne, where performers perform music, dance, and very interesting architectural structure. But up north, in the Kakadu National Park, there is the Crocodile Hotel. And it gobbled me up because I stayed there. And it won an International Architectural Award in the 1970s. Outside the actual building, you can see the eye of the crocodile up here, and the creative architecture can be seen in Adelaide in their convention center, as well as the Opera House in Melbourne, and the walking bridge in Tasmania, in Launceston, supposedly until recently the longest walking bridge in the world. And of course, the famous Sydney Bridge over Sydney Harbour. Now, that's Luna Park. Luna Park is situated over here on the other side, across from Sydney and the Opera House. It dates back to the last century, and from what I was able to research, it was taking its name from the Brooklyn Luna Park amusement park. I entitled this Gobbling Up Customers. Now for a little humor to finish up our presentation. This I spotted in Adelaide. Beware, if a rhinoceros on a giant skateboard was heading your way, you'd get out of the way, right? Well, guess what? A tram weighs about the same as 30 rhinos, so it's not something you want to get hit by. So look, listen, be alert around trams. So, being alert, beware of snakes. I got off a ferry, and that's the first thing I saw. Crocodiles, I told you about them. I didn't want to go swimming there. I brought my bathing suit, but I didn't go swimming. Along the highways, you never know what you're going to get. Here, a wombat. Here, an echidna. An emu. And on the north coast of Tasmania, coming in from the Arctic Ocean, yes, penguins. This one jumped right out of the sign, a kangaroo, that I photographed in a museum. This huge lobster was on a fishing, I guess a market. The fishermen brought in their catch. And they have the best ginger beer I've ever had. It wasn't sweet, it had a real bite to it. So their mascot was the Tasmanian devil, which has quite a bite to it. Size of a small dog, and the most powerful jaws in the animal kingdom. You don't want him to put the bite on you. That, I thought, was kind of humorous. I saw this in the wild. This is one of those banksias that was shedding its petals, and there were two eyes where the seeds had popped out and one that hadn't yet, and the leaf was sticking out like a tongue. So I entitled this The Banksia Man, and this is The Termite Man. How would you like to collect those? You can tell your grandchildren you know what a coprolite is. Petrified dinosaur droppings. These are for sale in lots of gift shops, and I thought they were kind of humorous. Then I saw this sign on the street, and I said, "Hair dude." Well, that was perfect for these people. This was a flower festival, an annual festival in Kings Park in Perth, West Australia, where the people dress up in costumes they create to symbolize or mimic a particular indigenous flower. You remember the nut from... Yes. Now, I know you don't know the humor here, but this woman is smoking under a Chinese cigar tree. And you're going to have your head in the clouds to smoke, so I thought there was a little humor here, Cloud 9 Smoke Shop. And then I looked up, and I found this fish cloud. And if you're careful to look around, you see things you wouldn't normally be aware of, like the Rusty Water Brewery, handcrafted brewed ales. Made from rusty water? I don't know. Here you go. Absorb that. This is my favorite. Health food. And this I found in a market. They covered the word fresh with product of Australia. And you notice these oysters come from Coffin Bay. I guess they're to die for. And would you hire this catering firm? They may not deliver on time, laissez-faire. And go to Nando's for lunch. There's your welcoming. This is a tram in Adelaide, South Australia. Traffic can be murder. And in a police station, looking out the window. And they were playing Kinky Boots at the theater in Melbourne. And when I was in the Kakadu National Park, I saw this. I don't understand it. I don't know what this person was doing in there, but clearly the boots were kind of kinky. Now I know you have no idea the significance of this in terms of humor, but these are mailboxes in a little village on Kangaroo Island, out in the middle of nowhere. They recirculate their products that they don't need, and like this is a gas can that they sliced open and created a mailbox. And lastly, I'm getting gobbled up by the remarkable rock, Eagle Rock. So it's time to exit, so butt out. And by the way, I discovered the moon is upside down south of the equator. Thank you. If you have any questions, I know it's a little late, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you for your patience.